The Padawan learner of the Jedi Master Lilith Two-Seas, Kruk was a male whippet from the planet Tula. Kruk first came to prominence when he served alongside his master and a group of several other renowned Jedi during the Inchori Uprising. Naturally immune to Force suggestion, the Inchori had been a race of aggressive reptilian warriors armed with cortosis, a substance which was famed for its ability to repel lightsaber blades. The species had been secretly mobilized against the Republic by the Sith Lord Darth Plagueis and his apprentice, Darth Sidious. Kruk's own master had been killed during the fighting, along with half a dozen other Jedi, including the esteemed Council Master, Gaeta. While Kruk would complete his training under another master, the death of Two-Seas continued to affect him. Even after attaining the rank of Jedi Knight, Kruk had difficulty coping with the deaths of those close to him. While the Inchori themselves had been considered potential candidates for cloning by Darth Plagueis, plans to furnish the creation of a clone army would not fully come to fruition until after his death. In 22 BBY, Palpatine and his new apprentice Darth Tyrannus instigated the Clone Wars, a conflict which saw the Confederacy of Independent Systems secede from the Galactic Republic. Most of the Jedi of this time took up their roles as Jedi generals in service to the Republic, leading their clone troopers against the droid armies of the Separatists. While initially just as devoted to the cause as any of his fellows, Kruk eventually began to question whether the Jedi was still walking the correct path, as the horrors of war and the loss of so many of his men took their toll on his conscience. He was eventually brought back into the fold by Mace Windu, who quelled a potential schism within the Jedi Order, reuniting the High Council with the leaders of a group of Jedi dissidents. Kruk participated in a number of the most infamous battles waged throughout the war, including the Battle of Hypori and later the Siege of Selu Kamai. Over the course of his service, he would face off against such notables as General Grievous, Asajj Ventress, and Quinlan Vos. Toward the war's end, Kruk and his companions attempted to travel to Mygeeto in order to assist Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, who was stationed on the Frigid World alongside the Galactic Marines. But as it happened, they were delayed by a Separatist attack, and so instead made their way to the Jedi training facility on Bogdan III in order to make repairs to their vessel. Shortly after their arrival, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine issued Order 66. Unlike the vast majority of his Jedi brethren, Kruk survived the Purge, protecting the Jedi initiates his fellow masters had sacrificed their lives for. Tired from years of fighting and wary of his own inner darkness, Kruk abandoned the fight and adopted the role of mentor and guardian to his new students. Believing that the instruction of young ones was the true calling of the Jedi, Kruk settled on Arkinia, where he guided his charges from a secluded outpost throughout the dark times. Emerging onto the galactic stage during the Clone Wars, the Dathomirian Zabrak Savage Opress was raised a Night Brother, the male warrior servants to the Night Sister Witches of Dathomir. While not initially cruel, nor especially powerful, Savage was eventually selected by Asajj Ventress to be used as her agent of retribution against Count Dooku. Dooku had betrayed the ambitious Dark Jedi on the orders of his own master, and so Ventress had sought out her Night Sister kin on Dathomir in order to take revenge. The band of witches used their force magics to imbue Savage Opress with greatly enhanced strength and durability, robbing him of his own will in the process. Presented to Dooku as a new potential enforcer, Savage was meant to act as a covert operative who was to assist Ventress in killing the Count. When the plan failed, Savage was abandoned by both the Dark Jedi and the Sith Lord as the two waged their own private war. With the spell placed over his mind finally broken, Savage made his escape, battling Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi in the process. On the advice of the Night Sister clan mother Talzin, Savage went in search of his brother, the former Sith apprentice, Darth Maul. Following Maul's mental and physical rehabilitation, he took his brother on as his apprentice. Together, the two began an ill-fated rise to power. While initially successful in the takeover of various criminal organizations and the Mandalorian Death Watch, the actions of the pair, which had included the murders of several Jedi, eventually drew the attention of Maul's former master. Darth Sidious confronted the pair personally. He defeated his potential rivals and took Maul captive immediately thereafter, though not before killing Savage while forcing his brother to watch. Hey guys, welcome to the next installment of the Versus series here on Grey Jedi 91. This matchup was requested by user Cameron Lindsay several months ago. I haven't done a request in a long time, and I thought this idea was a good one. I cannot speak for Cameron with any real degree of certainty since I never asked, but I suspect he chose these two characters because of how they were featured in Jen Sarai's videos as both lost to Warp Null. Although I do agree with all of the criticisms of Savage Opress's character that Jen Sarai detailed in his own video, The Blunt Instruments, I differ in my assessment of Opress as a combatant. This project served as an opportunity to explain why. And finally, as may be obvious to all of you, I will not be taking Kruk's appearances from the Legacy era into account. While the fact that he joined up with Luke's new Jedi Order and eventually even became Grand Master is cool and all, I believe this contest to be considerably more balanced if we focus on Kruk as he appeared during the events of Dark Times. And so, without any further ado, I present for you Kruk versus Savage Opress. Kruk was a male Whippet and was an apprentice at the same time as Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Whippets were a relatively long-lived race, on average living in excess of 2 centuries and only considered to be venerable after reaching the age of 250. Given how close he was to Obi-Wan in age, Kruk would therefore have been very young by the standards of his own people, even during the time of the Jedi Purge. The Whippets were a race of tall, furry bipeds who possessed sharp tusks and claws and were hugely muscular. Their water-repelling fur, thick layer of blubber insulation, and fat reserves enabled them to survive harsh winter weather and swim in the frigid oceans of their homeworld. Kruk was surprisingly acrobatic considering his massive bulk, and he also demonstrated greatly enhanced speed on multiple occasions. He has attacked opponents using forceful displays of hand-to-hand combat, including Inchori warriors. He's augmented his reflexes to turn aside, redirect, or simply evade blaster fire on countless occasions. And he has even taken advantage of his superior senses in order to take stock of his surroundings. One of my favorite examples being when he detected the scent of ozone from Quinlan Voss's ignited lightsaber. However, impressive as these various feats may have been, Kruk's physical resiliency was the stuff of legend. Kruk has been described as seemingly interminable, given that he has survived force grapples, hits from blaster bolts, falls from great heights, and even being slashed across the chest by a lightsaber more than once. This should really come as no surprise. Having said that, it would be rather misleading to suggest that Kruk can just tank through all this sort of punishment and keep on fighting. While he has indeed rallied from injuries that might have very well finished off some of his fellow Jedi and continued to fight on afterward, several of his most notable feats have called for considerable recovery time in bacta tanks or even the direct intervention of Jedi healers. While it would take quite a lot to kill Kruk, he could at least be placed out of commission, though doing so would be no mean feat. To my judgment at least, Kruk was without question one of the most physically vital and durable Jedi in the Order's history. The Inchori Uprising, the Clone Wars, Order 66, the Dark Times. Kruk survived all this and more. Needless to say, Kruk is not to be underestimated. On a purely physical level, Savage Opress was undoubtedly one of the most formidable figures of his time. Members of the Zabrak race distinguish themselves from humans in several ways. Their most visible traits were their natural crowns of horns and cultural facial tattoos which adorned their scalps and faces. Savage himself used his elongated cranial horns for combative purposes, having brutalized Adigalia using such a maneuver. Additionally, Zabraks possessed a second heart, as well as extremely high pain thresholds. After having been augmented by Mother Talzin's force magics, Savage Opress stood over 7 feet tall and possessed incredible physical strength and durability. He wore a set of blaster-resistant armor, and while his force-enhanced reflexes enabled him to deflect blaster fire, he was capable of withstanding bolts which got past his guard, or when bereft of his lightsaber. Savage has sent enemies hurtling through the air with the force of his physical strikes, and he has sustained saber locks with multiple high-caliber adversaries. He has fought in numerous lengthy battles, and even endured Count Dooku's force lightning, and continued to fight without showing signs of fatigue or trauma. He was reasonably fast and agile for a being with his large build. While some are quick to point out that he kept pace with Palpatine, I do not consider this indicative of Savage Opress's speed, as I believe Palpatine was merely toying with him. However, I cannot deny that he has kept pace with various Council Masters, and has on occasion even employed well-timed evasive maneuvers in order to avoid injury. Having said that, he certainly wasn't 100% successful. During his fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Savage Opress suffered the loss of his arm, and was refitted with a cybernetic one, which functioned just as well as his organic arm ever had. Overall, Savage Opress was quite a monstrous opponent. On a purely physical level, he was almost peerless during the time in which he lived, and this greatly made up for his relative inexperience and lesser devotion to technique and refinement. Essentially, Savage Opress's physical might made him a hell of a lot more effective than he had any right to be, and there just weren't many who could compete with him on this level. However, I do believe Kruk was one of the few who could match him in this regard. As far as physical strength is concerned, I'd say they're roughly on par. I cannot see Kruk as anything less than Savage's equal in this particular regard, possibly even his superior, though not by much. In terms of durability, Kruk is naturally the tougher combatant, though Savage's equipment and cybernetics as well as his high pain threshold go a long way toward making up the difference. While Savage appears to be the more sustainable of the two, I actually attribute this more to his strength in the Force than anything else. Savage can certainly press on through blaster fire more capably than Kruk, albeit only because of his armor, though this wouldn't matter much in a lightsaber duel. I consider Savage possibly a shade quicker than his competition, while the Jedi Master remains slightly more acrobatic. Kruk possesses environmental adaptations which make him better able to cope with the sorts of injuries that are likely to come into play during a lightsaber duel. However, for the purposes of a versus video, this really isn't all that relevant. To put it simply, Kruk is more likely to survive actually being struck by an opposing lightsaber than Savage is, but he'd still be incapacitated by such a blow all the same. However, as a member of a relatively primitive race of natural predators, Kruk does have natural alternative forms of attack. At the end of the day, it comes down to this. Should either combatant lose their weapon, Kruk would be the more viable. His razor-sharp claws and tusks are more likely to come into play during this engagement than Savage's horns, which wouldn't be of much use in any case. If blaster bolts and lightsaber blades couldn't reliably finish off Kruk, Savage's horns ain't gonna do the job either. All things considered, Kruk gets the physical edge, though only a slight one. Kruk's chosen martial arts style or styles have never been established in any source. However, based on what he has demonstrated, I believe his most likely combat disciplines can be inferred. Equipped with a standard lightsaber which featured a green blade, Kruk has demonstrated great skill at chaining unarmed strikes and grapples into his technique. Additionally, he has also incorporated force-assisted leaps and brutally aggressive slashing maneuvers and flourishes. On occasion, he has also employed a reversed grip, and he was skilled at redirecting blaster fire. Based on all of this information, a fellow Versus series creator called Rico Chico Milico theorized in his own video concerning the character that Kruk was a practitioner of the 4th and 5th forms of lightsaber combat, Ataru and Shien. Ideas which I would have to agree with. Ataru was the most physically demanding of all lightsaber forms. Characterized by aggressive and elaborate flourishing moves, the form was fast-paced and emphasized the incorporation of punches, kicks, and other physical strikes into one's blade work. Essentially, Ataru enabled one to use their entire body as a weapon. Shien, the 5th form, addressed blaster-wielding opponents and was not devised to address lightsaber dueling directly. Shien was created in answer to Surisu, the 3rd form of lightsaber combat, and first to emphasize defensive viability over anything else. While Surisu stressed deflection and energy conservation, Shien stressed redirection as a form of counterattack. Rather than turning a blaster bolt to the side, a Shien stylist would purposely redirect the bolt back at the caster. Needless to say, Kruk demonstrated each of these qualities in his personal form. When fighting at a distance, he capably redirected blaster fire. In order to close the distance, he deftly evaded his opponents using acrobatics. When on the offensive, he's bisected clone troopers and decapitated multiple Yinchori with a single blow. While a gentle soul, he doesn't typically pull his punches. The only notable examples where he did so were when he reluctantly struck Master Micah Giet while still a Padawan, and later on, he also hesitated in combat against Asajj Ventress during their duel on Rule, as he wished to spare her life if possible. I'd argue that he would have presented a greater challenge for her if he'd been going all out, though I don't deny that she outclassed him as a duelist and would have won regardless. Despite this, he was still capable of holding his own against Asajj Ventress on his lonesome, essentially for the same length of time that Sora Bulk dueled with Mace Windu. He also proved himself capable of briefly standing against General Grievous despite the fact that he had been exhausted from the start of the contest. The infamous Battle of Hypori concluded with a spectacular lightsaber battle only after the 5 Jedi involved had just participated in a grueling fight against an overwhelming force of super battle droids. Kruk also fought fairly evenly with Quinlan Vos later on during his failed attempt to prevent the assassination of Senator Viento, a figure which Vos mistakenly believed to be the mysterious second Sith Lord in league with Count Dooku. For all Kruk's achievements, he had his fair share of shortcomings. He has been manipulated into overextending himself by General Grievous. He has also been stunned, albeit only briefly, by a pommel strike from Asajj Ventress. However, that particular maneuver would have been followed up by a killing blow had Sean Giselle not intervened. His defenses have been consistently penetrated by opposing telekinesis, and he's been tossed about in this manner by figures such as Ventress and Quinlan Voss. While he may have a solid lightsaber defense and a decent amount of raw force power at his command, he's simply not adept at incorporating telekinetic strikes into his blade work, and even worse, he's vulnerable to opponents who can use such tactics. A capable marksman, Kruk was not above resorting to the use of blasters when the situation called for it, and following the execution of Order 66, Kruk took up the use of a bow and arrow, demonstrating great skill with archery, both in order to hunt animals so as to provide food for the initiates in his charge, and as a means of striking down his enemies from a distance. Overall, while Kruk was an experienced swordsman and a powerful warrior, he was not actually a dedicated lightsaber duelist. Kruk was a skilled field medic. He was a humble, though talented pilot, and a capable strategist in his own right, having treated his wounded allies, spirited less able passengers to safety, and calculated perfectly timed hyperspace jumps in order to evade near-certain death. He was essentially a soldier with force powers, a true Jedi general. He simply wasn't a consummate master of the lightsaber. While this functioned to his detriment on a practical level when facing more dedicated lightsaber duelists, it did nothing to dampen his reputation. Given how well he was able to contend with figures like Ventress and Voss over the course of the Clone Wars, I'd have to say that Kruk acquitted himself quite well, despite his disadvantage. And I consider this disadvantage merely the product of his primary areas of interest lying outside the realm of combat, as opposed to true lack of skill or limited potential on his part. Whatever his shortcomings may have been, the fact that the lightsaber taken from Kruk on Hypori became one of General Grievous's personal favorite trophies says a great deal about the Jedi Master. Despite the fact that I consider him to be a dull character, I do not consider Savage Opress to be a dim-witted brute. He certainly lacked subtlety, and when angered he could devolve into a rather mindless berserker. But that wasn't all there was to him. My friends Evan Nova and Jen Sarai have both stated in their own videos that Savage Opress employed a free-form fighting style. The YouTube user Sci-Fi Soup believes Opress to be a practitioner of Juyo, the seventh form of lightsaber combat. Personally, I do not think that Savage Opress truly mastered any particular lightsaber form. However, I do believe that he was influenced by those he served. This informal training, along with the extensive experience he gained throughout the Clone Wars, combined with the fact that Opress was raised to be a warrior from the time of his birth, lead me to believe that the idea that he operated without much thought or skill simply doesn't hold water. Savage Opress has gotten the better of Asajj Ventress. He's also managed to hold his own against Plo Koon, very nearly killing the Jedi Master in fact, and he's even withstood the combined efforts of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, albeit briefly. His most notable Jedi kill was that of longtime High Council member Adi Gallia. I would consider it a disservice to characters like these to maintain that they could have been bested by such a mindless brute. I believe Maul gave his brother the tools he needed to develop more fully as a duelist. Of the forms Maul studied, Juyo would seem to be the one Savage Opress's style most closely approximated. However, Juyo was the most difficult form to master and required the utmost discipline. Given the limited time frame in which he operated, and the complete lack of polish so readily observable in the duels he participated in, I simply don't believe it's possible for Savage to have mastered such a demanding style. After having discussed the matter with Antoine Bandelet, I now consider it more likely that Savage Opress practiced a variation of Shi Cho, with only the mere fundamentals of Juyo having been passed down to him. The emotionally charged state of mind and wide-sweeping attacks inherent to Form 1 are present in Savage Opress's fighting form. I'd argue that he was not as open to the Force as a true Form 1 master such as Kit Fisto was, however. One of the hallmarks of Shicho was the unpredictability of the form. Savage Opress's sequences have been anticipated, preempted, dodged, or simply sidestepped by various opponents, though only true masters have done so with ease. In many ways, Shicho is essentially a rudimentary version of Juyo. Form 1 differed from Form 7 in that it was optimized for use against multiple opponents rather than a singular adversary. It was less refined and erratic, but similarly unpredictable, unrelenting, and driven by the Force. It was simply characterized by a less focused state of mind. More than anything else, this is the difference between Savage Opress and his brother. Maul was capable of analyzing and outmaneuvering his opponents. Savage could only overwhelm. While his technique was unrefined and in need of polish, his instincts served him well and better enabled him to learn quickly. Equipped with a massive saber staff, which featured lengthened blades and an enlarged hilt, Savage Opress's effectiveness as a duelist can largely be attributed to his ability to recognize and capitalize on the benefits of his chosen weapon paired off with his physical might. His ability to attack using both ends of his weapon and scant uses of acrobatics better enabled him to maintain his center of balance and overwhelm his opponents almost immediately. He'd charge in, force his opponents onto the defensive, and keep the pressure up. Like the Orbalisk-empowered Darth Bane, he just happened to be durable enough that the occasional defensive lapses he suffered didn't really amount to much. For this reason, while he wasn't all that adaptable, he simply didn't need to be in the vast majority of cases. While it could be argued that his success in this regard was mainly due to his physical augmentation and not superior skill, it doesn't change the fact that he took full advantage of this benefit. Unlike the Orbalisk-empowered Darth Bane, however, Savage Opress could not afford to simply check out the rulebook entirely and fight with total reckless abandon. A lightsaber blow would clearly be as deadly to him as anybody else. Savage Opress sacrificed defensive viability in order to devote all of his focus to his powerful, wide-sweeping offensive, in order to rob his opponents of the chance to exploit his openings. He didn't provide much opportunity for his opponents to think things through either, because he was just that domineering, and this is where his weapon comes into play. He made excellent use of his weapon's dual-blade functionality. He would evade or parry attacks with minimal physical motion required on his part, and he could also execute offensive sequences and revert back to his default position nearly instantaneously. Lather, rinse, repeat. Savage Opress's technique, while entirely bereft of grace, was nevertheless extremely effective and executed by a fighter who knew exactly what he was doing. Neither of these two were true master duelists by any stretch of the imagination, but where Kruk was not geared toward lightsaber duels, confrontations like these are exactly the sorts that fostered Savage Opress's growth as a swordsman. While I think it would be fair to characterize Savage Opress's form as crude, this would really only be a major drawback for him while facing true master duelists over prolonged periods of time. In my view, the best demonstration of Savage Opress's strengths as a lightsaber duelist can be observed by examining his duel with Adi Gallia. On a technical level, Gallia was clearly the more skilled of the two and had a hell of a lot more experience. However, she simply couldn't break Savage. For every strike of hers that he turned aside, she had to evade 3 or 4 of his own. Quite simply, she couldn't match his output or his strength and was forced to endure the storm that he unleashed upon her, allowing herself to be herded around in the process. She had to continuously give ground. She even attempted to exploit an opening in Savage's technique by landing a kick to his knee. Keeping in mind the fact that Gaeta had successfully engaged General Grievous and even stunned the cyborg with a kick to the face during their brief confrontation, I think it's safe to say that she was no slouch in single combat. She clearly possessed a reasonable degree of strength, or else the ability to augment her physical abilities using the Force. The idea that Sauvage could withstand a maneuver like this probably never even occurred to her, and, caught off guard by his durability, she was taken down shortly thereafter. When facing off against Obi-Wan Kenobi, Sauvage fought much the same way. Obi-Wan, being a more skilled duelist, equipped with dual sabers, and possessed of far greater strength and a more viable defensive technique than Gaeta had, landed several blows to Sauvage Opress while also dueling Darth Maul. The thing of it is, these initial few strikes did absolutely nothing. I believe Kenobi attempted this seemingly futile gesture multiple times because he was trying to figure out which angle he needed to be coming from. He was probing Sauvage's weak points, and eventually he found one, but this required about 5 attempts in order to get right. If Gaeta had Kruk's strength, that fight would likely have ended on her terms, her maneuver leaving Sauvage prone to a devastating attack, as Obi-Wan would later demonstrate. Kruk has more than enough of the physical strength, but he lacks the technical skill needed to pull something like that off while dealing with a duelist as unrelenting as Sauvage Opress. Kruk's physiology, combined with Force-enhanced strength, would grant him a better chance at matching Opress on this level more easily than either Gaeta or even Obi-Wan Kenobi could have ever hoped to. But the fact of the matter is, he doesn't possess the same level of skill with the blade that either of those two masters had. His distaste for fighting and lack of dedication to lightsaber dueling would leave him ill-equipped to take the initiative against a warrior like Sauvage Opress. However, this isn't to say that Sauvage Opress would be able to dominate Kruk in turn. We'd still be left observing something of a stalemate here, as Sauvage isn't packing much more than his sheer physical might, and this just wouldn't be of much use against a massive Jedi like Kruk. Here he would be faced with an opponent he just wouldn't be able to muscle his way through. On the other hand, while Kruk has held his own against duelists of this caliber, he has never proven that he can do anything more than cope. Because of this, I just can't bring myself to bet on Kruk's greater technical sophistication with forms ill-suited to a contest like this one. At the same time, I consider it equally unfair to assume Sauvage would be able to overpower Kruk, as we've never seen him pitted against a Force wielder who matches him on a physical level. And this would negate what I consider to be his greatest advantage. While I don't agree that he's as lacking for skill as others have claimed, his raw physical power is still the greatest contributor to his success, and he just wouldn't be able to count on that here. I declare Kruk and Sauvage Opress equals in terms of how their skills with martial arts stack up against one another. As a Force wielder, Kruk was surprisingly powerful and versatile for such an obscure young master. However, much as can be said of his martial arts abilities, his greatest powers were not oriented for combat. However, this doesn't mean that he was lacking for skill, nor incapable of employing his powers in such a fashion should the need arise. As far as telekinesis was concerned, Kruk was highly capable. While still a Padawan, he sent several Yinchori warriors reeling with a powerful Force wave. During the events of Dark Times, he levitated Master Zeo and several younger Jedi into a carriage, enabling them to make their escape. Most impressively, he has even pulled an ore carrier out of the sky, forcing it to crash violently to the ground. He's never been displayed using telekinetic attacks against fellow Force wielders, and he's even found himself on the receiving end of such powers. However, he's demonstrated enough magnitude with his abilities that I certainly think he could bring his powers to bear, should the need arise. His skill at incorporating such tactics into his overall combat technique remains very much in question, however. Kruk was a gifted telepath, though, as was made obvious from his appearances in Legacy, he had not yet reached his peak by the end of the Clone Wars. He did eventually attain skill with the highly advanced art of battle meditation, and also displayed the ability to perceive the thoughts of others, as he proved to Kate Skywalker. However, as of the events of Dark Times, he never displayed anything beyond the basic Jedi mind trick or the beast trick ability. Kruk's use of the power was not based around an attempt to dominate the mind of and outright control a beast, but rather the ability to form a bond with the creature through the Force, a practice similar to Obi-Wan Kenobi's own use of the power on Utapau. By far, Kruk's most impressive use of the Force stemmed from his knowledge of Jedi healing techniques. It was noted by the Sith Lord Darth Plagueis that it was normally far more difficult to promote self-healing than it was to heal others. Bearing this in mind, it is my belief that Kruk was one of the finest Jedi healers of his time, as he demonstrated great facility with both applications of the power. By drawing on such powers, he attempted to revive the fallen Jedi Master Oppo Rancisis following his assassination at the hands of Sora Bulk. Despite the futility of his efforts, the fact that this task was entrusted to Kruk suggested that his skill in this field surpassed that of any of the other masters present, including Asherat Het, which is saying something, as Het had once served as the administrator of the Jedi Healing Center located on New Holstis, where he attempted to instruct Anakin Skywalker in the healing arts. Using his powers, Kruk successfully brought Chase Piru back from the brink of death, after the young human female had been hit by a blaster bolt fired at point-blank range and left for dead. In addition to this, he has demonstrated nearly unparalleled skill with the healing trance. While healing trances were apparently common to the whipped species, I believe this was something which was likely enhanced by Kruk's depth in the Force, as well as his knowledge of the Jedi arts. Other Jedi Masters, such as Thulm and Anya Kiro, have demonstrated the ability to slow their bodily functions to the point of apparent death, hiding their presence in the Force in the process. However, Kruk took this power to an entirely different level. Rather than merely playing possum, Kruk's apparently lifeless body was in fact deep in meditation, calling upon the Force to promote self-healing. This is what allowed him to survive and recover from being slashed with General Grievous's lightsabers, not once, but twice. In his own way, I would certainly consider Kruk to be an exceptionally powerful Force wielder, but however practical as his powers may have been, there is no denying that they simply weren't developed with the intent of undermining or overpowering his opponents. While he was a skilled and worthy master of the Force, with plenty of diverse and practical powers at his command, Kruk simply wasn't a dedicated combative Force wielder. While I have stated my belief that he was not some blindly aggressive berserker absolutely incapable of using tactics or forethought with regard to his martial arts technique, as a Force wielder, Savage Opress lived up to his namesake. As has already been noted, his prowess with physical augmentation, when paired off with the Night Sisters' empowerment ritual, made him one of the most formidable warriors of his time. Beyond that, however, Opress never displayed any level of skill with any advanced Dark Force powers, such as Sith lightning or sorcery, and he has never been noted for his telepathic prowess. However, his displays with telekinesis were exceedingly powerful. An easily enraged monster of an opponent, Savage Opress made frequent usages of omnidirectional Force blasts and waves, which have scattered large groups of opponents. He has also breached the defenses of Count Dooku, Asajj Ventress, Anakin Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, I would note that such achievements seem to only have been made possible when Savage actively drew upon his rage to strengthen his connection to the dark side, or else he has simply taken advantage of the fact that his targets were distracted. As such, these are not abilities he is likely to make use of from the outset. Having said that, the more frustrated and angry he becomes, the more likely it is that such extreme instinctual applications will come into play. He has made use of less powerful, though far more tactically oriented and focused attacks, having employed a well-timed force push to shove Adigalia up against a wall, a powerful repulse in order to break free of his containment cell, a guided saber throw that decapitated several Black Sun operatives, and he has also used his abilities in concert with his brother, Darth Maul, to sweep dozens of enemies off a bridge, a feat similar to what Masters Yoda and Mace Windu accomplished during the Battle of Coruscant. He has also used the Force to crush or choke his targets, and he has even pushed a large ship off a landing pad with only a brief moment required to summon the necessary power to do so. There was very little in the way of technique or refinement with regard to his Force abilities, and, in a very real sense, Savage Opress was nothing more than a blunt instrument when it came to his use of his telekinetic powers. But this does not make him either incompetent nor ineffective. His powers were straightforward, yes, but basic? No, not by a long shot. And he could call upon them in the blink of an eye. Whether purposefully guided or instinctively enacted as a last-ditch maneuver, his powers could be brought to bear with a minimal degree of difficulty and have never been shown to take a toll on his stamina. Considered by many to be a Sith apprentice, I would hesitate to describe Savage Opress in this manner, and I don't imagine the title held much value for him, if only because his brief career did not allow him to fulfill his potential. I would argue that his shortcomings were most evident in the underdeveloped skill set he held with regard to manipulation of the Force. Having said that, he was certainly not lacking for power. In an overall sense, Kruk is clearly the more masterful, adaptable, and academic Force wielder, and quite capable in the field of telekinesis himself. But, despite his relatively diverse array of powers, very few of them would actually impact the final outcome of this fight. At the end of the day, there is no denying the fact that Kruk's use of the Force for combative purposes pales in comparison to what Savage Opress has brought to bear, despite the latter's lesser understanding of the Force. To be fair, we've only ever seen Kruk overcome by such displays of telekinesis from powerful figures such as Asajj Ventress, Master Zeo, and Quinlan Vos. I consider the feats attributed to those who have bested him in this manner to be indicative of their own depth in the Force, as opposed to true weakness on his part. Obviously, I seriously doubt whether just anybody would be able to waltz up to Kruk and ragdoll him. However, Savage Opress is one of those figures who stands a fair chance of accomplishing just that, much as I hate to admit it. Savage Opress gets the edge as a Force wielder. In all honesty, I believe this fight would most likely play out in the same approximate fashion as Kruk's bout with Quinlan Vos on Coruscant following the assassination of Senator Viento. However, I also believe this would be a far more drawn-out and vicious affair. From the outset, Savage would charge in relentlessly on the attack as usual. Kruk would turn aside the initial flurry with little difficulty. He would then retaliate with his own barrage, and most unusually, Savage would be forced to give ground. Unaccustomed to having to think strategically and quickly, Savage would see no other option but to press on using the same tactic as before, but now he would attempt it with even greater ferocity, pushing the whippet on the back foot. Seeing that the contest wasn't about to go anywhere quickly if the fight proceeded in this manner, the massive Jedi would charge forward, recklessly hoping for the best, tackling his enemy to the ground, sending both of their weapons clattering away in the process. Grappling with the Dark Warrior, Kruk would fight with tooth and claw, attempting to beat his adversary into submission. What began as a heated lightsaber duel would devolve unceremoniously into a tactless brawl, with Kruk slowly but surely gaining the upper hand. Brought to his knees and mildly injured, his pride more so than anything else, Savage would regain his fighting spirit, empowered through his rage and humiliation. Savage would instinctively lash out through the Force as a last-ditch maneuver, sending the Jedi hurtling meters away. Empowered by his fury, Savage Opress would reach out and grasp Kruk in a telekinetic vice. Hoisting his opponent into the air, his fist clenched, Savage would attempt to throttle the Jedi Master, though Kruk would raise a defensive barrier to prevent this from happening quickly. Running out of patience and losing his hold on the Jedi, Savage would blast the whippet against the wall, relaxing his telekinetic hold, allowing the Jedi to collapse to the floor. His reflexes dulled by the thrashing he just received, Kruk would begin to pull himself to his feet, determined to continue the fight. Savage Opress, still relatively fresh and strengthened by the dark side, moves far more quickly, however, and leaps forward, calling his fallen weapon back into his hand as he does so. Savage Opress lands upon his opponent, pinning Kruk to the ground beneath a booted heel. Savoring the moment, the Dark Warrior drives the point of his blade downward, plunging his saber through flesh and bone. I proclaim Savage Opress the victor. Well guys, there you have it. I want to stress that this was a topic of debate between myself and my friends, and so I will understand if you do not agree with my verdict. As always, I only ask that you keep any objections or contrary opinions confined to civil responses. All I really believe is that Savage would be most likely to conclusively end the fight on his own terms. But he certainly would not dominate Kruk. If Kruk had a greater facility with combative force abilities, or a proven ability to resist telekinetic attacks, I would say that he'd have this one in the bag. As it stands though, I've got to call it as I see it, much as I hate to admit that in this particular case, as I am a big fan of Kruk's character. Before I go, I'd like to thank Antoine Mandala for his insight, which helped me during the writing process for this video's script. But I'd also like to extend my thanks to my friends Jedi and Evanova95, and most particularly to fellow Versus series creators Rico Chico Maliko and Sci-Fi Soup. Each of these guys worked with some combination of these characters in prior videos, which indirectly provided me with a foundation from which I could craft my own arguments. In other words, while I don't agree with everything that they've all had to say, I was able to gain a better understanding of the characters involved by watching their videos, while I researched the characters for myself. You probably already know Antoine Mandala, Jedi, or Evanova95 if you know who I am, but if you don't know Sci-Fi Soup or Rico Chico Maliko, please go check those guys out. They're not nearly as well known as they should be. And of course, thanks to each and every one of you for watching. I hope to catch you all on the next video. Until then, take care my friends, and may the Force be with you, always.